Hello again and welcome back. This is chapter 8 and it is all about super cities. There are a lot of different cities out there, big, small, whatnot, but they all have the same basic problem. Most of them are all open to the elements. And as a society and as a species, we've moved to the point where it's about high time that we stop being affected by things like pests, natural disasters, and other type of stuff like that. And you're probably wondering how the heck that's going to happen, but one of the points of these cities is to prevent damage from things like tornadoes, hail, hurricanes, earthquakes, and prevent a lot of the hassles that have to do with pests, not necessarily just like ants or flies or little stuff like bugs and stuff like that, but also larger pests like raccoons or any type of pest like a bird, like a pigeon, or any like rat, something like that. Hopefully I don't go over things more than once in this chapter. I probably will, but a second goal of this chapter is going to be efficiency. Since the cities themselves they'll cover less land space, but they'll have more space within them, so they'll be a lot more efficient. I'll get into that a little bit later. The reason why I'm trying to prevent pests and natural disasters and stuff like that is because in the previous chapters, legalization, death penalty, and prisons, a lot of the crime and stuff like that has hopefully already been eliminated, and with familiars has been eliminated. So the only real cause of death besides war at this point would be natural disasters. So hopefully this chapter takes care of that. But one thing I'd like to get into right off the bat is earthquakes. It's pretty obvious how my super cities would keep out stuff like floods and rain and hail and tornadoes and stuff like that because they're just so darn big and they're all in a large sphere. But earthquakes are a little bit different story because they're not really like something hitting you or trying to like get in. It's just the whole earth around you is moving, and it's very difficult to prevent stuff like you can't prevent it really, but it's difficult to minimize the damage that are caused by stuff like that, and people all over the world are affected by stuff like earthquakes. And there's two ways that I plan on fixing this little problem. And the first way is imagine your brain and the cerebral fluid that surrounds it. Your brain within your skull isn't like touching your skull directly. There's actually a small layer of fluid, not this big, but there's a small layer of fluid that gives it a little bit of leeway so it can move around in there. When your head moves a little bit, it basically compresses it and creates more pressure on this side, and then it's a little bit harder to move, so it slows it down a lot. So obviously, apart from huge jarring impacts like football players or something like that endure, this design really protects the insides of your brains, the very important, fragile portions of your brain. This is how I propose we fix the problem of earthquakes. And the second way is to actually have like small cross rubber, not really rubber, but a movable, I mean, it can be rubber. I'm not saying it doesn't have to be. Little stanchions that are attached to both sides of the inside and the outside of the fluid. So it's like your brain would have these attached directly to them, and then the other ends of them would be attached to your skull, and they'd be like crossed. And I can't really do that looking backwards, but yeah. So that would also limit the movement so that wouldn't have any extreme damage to happen. And it wouldn't eliminate the problem of earthquakes altogether, but the city itself and the fact that it's so huge and these buffers that we'd put in them would greatly, I believe, greatly reduce the amount of damage or any sort of detriment that earthquakes can have on people and buildings and whatnot. And obviously the enclosure will take care of the rest. This is actually a picture of the city that can be built on the water. It's really just a concept. Obviously there's a circle, and this is a big air ballast, so it can be sunk or raised. This area down here is just, like a hatchery for fish. These are tethers that go down to the sides. This is a little tether vehicle. It goes down to the bottom. This is the bottom, and it's like this is a hatchery for like lobsters or bottom feeders. This is another concept drawing for one of the cities on the water. I know I have two on the water, but that's just because the one on the land is really simple and doesn't really require a lot of explaining. This is just a little rough. It obviously isn't probably going to be like this. What the city is inside. These are tethers to hold it to the bottom like the one before. And this line right here is actually a transmission line for power. It's held up by buoys and tethered to the ground as well, just so that, I mean, it could take advantage of the solar power and the natural resources, but it can also, if it's located around the geothermal activity underwater, the big fissures, it could have geothermal power plants under the water. It could use that to feed electricity to the city itself, or it could have floating solar out here. However you want to do it. It could be multiple ways. It could have shore power, it could have geothermal, it could have some of its own solar. Trying not to take up too much of the fish's sunlight. I don't want to affect algae growth or anything like that. This is the last one. This is on the ground. I think it says ground level. This is really just a really rough, this isn't even conceptual at all. This is just, I was playing around with the city design, but I kind of I tried to make a little scale over here with what real trees would look like in comparison to the size. But I'm pretty sure they'd be even smaller than that. This thing would be massive. So anyway, there's that. I'd like to design them around a population. So instead of building them and then seeing how much people you can fit in there, I'd like to originally design them to house up to 1 million people. And I'd like them to have the ability to house also 2 million, but only really be designed in a stable way to hold 1 million. Just a figure, whatever you guys want to put in there, really, it doesn't really matter. Back on track, if you take seasonal weather patterns and how much sunlight falls in certain times, what you can do is you can limit the amount of sunlight that comes in. That way, during the winter months, you can allow more sunlight in and therefore more heat to be trapped in the sphere itself so that you would use less energy to heat it. And then also the reverse of that, in the summer, you would let less light in so that less heat would get trapped in there, more heat would be released so that it would be cooler during the summer. And not only that, but you can change things or make things adjustable, like the color of the buildings. Lighter colors reflect light, darker colors absorb light. You can have a dynamic system set up to where in the summer, I guess you can use lighter colors so it just reflects more light. You need less light to see things, or it reflects more light so it'll be cooler on the inside. And during the winter, you can use darker colors. And I don't know exactly how you would go about doing this. I mean, buildings could have like panels that would flip over. I don't know. Like I said, I can't think of everything. But I mean, there's lots of different ways you can do it, I'm sure. Probably, maybe not lots, but there's at least a couple. But yeah, with the combination of those two things, at the very least, you should be able to have a pretty good control over the temperature on the inside. And I think that cooling it is probably going to be the major factor. Winter and keeping it warm really isn't probably going to be a problem at all. Just because, for one, I mean, it's like a big greenhouse. It's going to be enclosed, and the only difference with that is the greenhouses usually just have plants in them, and this would have electrical equipment, humans, all sorts of sources of heat in there. It would really just be keeping it cool that would be your problem. In the winter, you'd be fine, really. It'd be the summer you'd be trying to keep it cool at. So that's the efficiency on that part. And also, when you look at the layout of a city and you have it all laid out, like your whole city on this big flat area, it's really spread out. And what this super city would do is it would take all those pieces of the city and then just like put them all together so you take up smaller space. And in my opinion, that would be kind of like giving back part of nature in certain areas. Some areas, I mean, nature is like desert or winter tundra, so you don't really need to give that back. But, well, I mean, you should still, but you don't need to. You basically take all that space and condense it, and what you end up with is a lot more efficient use of space. And that's multiple ways, not just one. Just looking at it, obviously, it's more efficient use of space. But if you look at public services like trash, mail, no transportation, stuff like that, if you had a city that was filled with nothing but like high-rise condos, more efficient types of housing and stuff like that, then you would basically be cutting out like 1,000 middlemen. One of my goals for the city is to, obviously, something that goes along with public transportation is making it actually possible to build a 100% public transportation system. This city is probably the one way you possibly do that, because having buses or trains or something in this huge network that goes around the city it stretches things out, makes it really inefficient, when what you can really do is just set up a really efficient like type of subway system, but have it like on 3 different levels of the city, like obviously one in the direct center, and then two more on the opposing top and bottom sides of that, kind of in the middle ways between the absolute top and the absolute bottom. And then just have elevator systems in between. And so instead of having like, it's kind of hard to explain this unless you set it up on a graph, but going up and down stairs or taking up and down elevators and then using these other systems is a lot more efficient than spreading it out on a big city scale public transportation system. Also, living in high rise condominiums, people have a lot of complaints about those things, and I'd like to address a couple of those before I move on. One of the complaints, obviously, is noise from your neighbors. Some places do a really good job of reducing that. They soundproof some of the walls and stuff like that, but some of them kind of mess up and they don't soundproof like the floors and the ceilings. They just soundproof like the walls so the people on the next to you. So obviously take that into account, soundproof the walls and the ceilings and everything. So hopefully that would limit that as much as possible. Also, like I said, it would actually be designed to physically be able to hold twice as many people. So what you'd have is every other place would actually be occupied. So the unit above you would be empty, below you would be empty, and both sides of you would be empty. It would be like a checkered pattern. So not only would it be soundproof, but most likely no one's going to be up there unless they're on vacation or, something like that. Probably not going to be filled. Another thing that people have a problem with is trash. And I have a problem with this just having a freestanding house also. But people have trash rooms. I mean, some people do it differently. I would prefer having two different chutes, one for organic waste and one for recyclables. And I say that because I would eventually like for all the products that we produce to be completely recyclable. It's a little bit more expensive in the beginning, but when you look at it in the long run, you have a bag of chips, and sure, it's really cheap to make that thin little bag that it coats it, but when you look at it in the long run, if you have a container, not only can you stack it more easily, your chips survive more pressure from other chip bags and transport, but also you can recycle it and you can use that thing hundreds of times and you end up taking up about the same amount of money that it would really cost in materials just to make hundreds and hundreds of those bags. So as much as possible, I'd really like our civilization to move towards really focusing on making things recyclable so you can just limit yourself down to these two things. The second chute would be, like I said, biological refuse. And something that people don't know about biological waste, even things like eggshells, banana peels, pizza crusts that people don't eat. I eat my pizza crust. I don't waste anything. Just any kind of biological things, is something that's gone rotten because it's been in your fridge too long. Anything like that would go down this trash chute. That system could end up being connected at the very bottom with another system that connects up your sewage, which can actually separate the solid and liquid components of people's waste. And if you combine all those materials together under the right conditions, you can actually produce methane gas. Some people are like, oh, well, why would you want some smelly gas? But it's actually one of the very few fuels that you can actually produce, and it's renewable. What you would end up doing is taking all your waste products and end up creating energy with it. What you basically do, and this is really simplified, is you put all that stuff in a big vat, like a big storage, huge storage, like cylinder. You can make it a square, you can make it whatever you want. You cover it so no oxygen gets in there, and then you have a slow churner or whatever, however you want to mix it up. And what it does is you let that bacteria break digested food down. It ends up emitting gas, and then you end up collecting all the gas, and then you take the excess product. So you don't really have to synthetically create fertilizers. You can just reuse the old waste products you've already attained. So you can use a compressed methane to power vehicles just like gas. It would just be like having like a golf cart or something like that that's powered by propane or a gas grill, anything like that you can use it on. Obviously, I'd like more of the power to come from solar power just because it's cleaner. You'd still be producing that backup type of energy